All right, guys, welcome to module 2 of Money Moves. Today, we're going to be talking about the why, what, and how of building an audience. And what we're going to be doing in weeks 2 through 6 is basically trying to flesh out the concepts that we've already introduced implicitly in week 1 of flash sales. We're just going to do so with a bit more of the underlying theory and in a little bit more detail and perhaps with a little bit more of complexity. But hopefully you'll be able to see as we move through each of these weeks that you're already doing a version of what we're going to talk about in each of these modules. Hopefully it just helps you to understand what it is we talked about last week and to also build on any progress you may have already made and to develop momentum from that. So with that said, let's jump in. Today's module is going to be divided into 3 big chunks. In the first, I'm going to try and convince you as to the why and the theory of why it's really important to be precise in selecting an audience to do business with, as opposed to just being a jack of all trades and doing business with anyone that crosses your path. Then we're going to talk about the practicalities of how you should go about picking and defining the audience that you're going to do business with. And then we're going to finish up with a little talk on the strategy of how you can position yourself in front of this audience, go against the grain, stand out from the crowd, and not get drowned out by the incumbents that are already in the space that you operate in. To begin the why section, I want you to imagine that you're an athlete with a broken leg and you're faced with 2 different surgeons to do the surgery for you to fix that broken leg. And obviously, like any smart person, you want to maximize your chances of a positive outcome. In this instance, it's going to be, a speedy, effective recovery. And you want to minimize your chances of a negative outcome. Which of the following are you going to pick to do that surgery for you? Let's imagine that surgeon A has done nothing but fix broken legs for the last 20 years. And I'll throw you in a bonus. Surgeon A has come highly recommended to you by people within your peer group, from your community, who have suffered a similar injury and have experienced a positive outcome in doing business with this surgeon. As a result of that information, how confident are you going to be of the positive outcome that we just described on the previous slide? And how worried are you about a negative outcome? Would you pay good money to have this surgeon fix your broken leg? Probably quite a lot. Now let's look at Surgeon B. Surgeon B, to your knowledge, has not come recommended to you by anyone within your peer group or anyone who has suffered a similar injury and has experienced a positive outcome as a result of having this surgeon operate on them. In fact, you just randomly found this surgeon and they'll do any body part, any injury for any population. And I'll even concede to you that on a technical level, Surgeon A and Surgeon B are just as skilled as one another. But even discounting for this fact, armed with the information that we have about Surgeon A and Surgeon B, how confident are you in a positive outcome if you allow Surgeon B to operate on your broken leg? Comparatively, how worried are you about a negative outcome if you select Surgeon B versus Surgeon A? Would you be as willing to spend the same amount of money with Surgeon B as you would be with Surgeon A? I would argue, and I hope you agree, that you're probably going to do business with Surgeon A. Let's look at why that is the case. And it boils down to basic economics. If you adhere to what is known as the Austrian School of Economics, they would argue, I think correctly, that all human actions arise as a result of a desire to enhance well-being or to improve our circumstances. If there's no dis-ease or dissatisfaction or discomfort in the present, there is no motivation to act. And of course, purchasing behavior comes under this umbrella of human action. When we act, we are deploying limited resources to achieve that improvement in well-being. Primarily in business, money, but time, energy, attention, status, emotional energy, these are also limited or scarce resources. And because we are, for the most part, rational economic actors, when we spend our limited resources, we want the best possible improvement in well-being per unit that we spend, and we want to limit the downside as much as possible. So we want as much bang for our buck as we can. The bigger the gap between perceived value, how much we think our well-being is going to improve as a result of an action, relative to cost, what we perceive to be what we give up in terms of those limited resources that I just mentioned. The bigger the gap, or the bigger the ratio between those two, the more attractive a particular course of action appears to us, and within a business context, the likelier we are to make a purchasing decision. Given what we just talked about, who are you more confident is going to give you the greatest possible improvement in your well-being per unit of limited resources invested? Surgeon A or Surgeon B? Who do you think is least likely to force you to incur unwanted costs, like we talked about in the previous slides? Surgeon A or Surgeon B? I think you can make a fairly well-reasoned argument that clearly Surgeon A is going to have a much more favorable perceived ratio, because it's still perception, of potential improvement in well-being versus potential costs. And as a result, Surgeon A could actually charge a lot more money for the same service than Surgeon B. And this analogy is not specific or unique to the medical world. People are going to come to you with specific problems to solve. They are seeking an enhancement in their well-being, a change in their circumstances when they do business with you. And the expectation is that you are going to deploy your skill set as a coach to achieve that outcome. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that if you narrow your focus to solving a particular problem or set of problems again and again and again, your mastery at solving that particular problem is going to accelerate, and you're going to get much, much better at doing it versus if you spread your focus across a wide array of problems. You're also, as a result of that specialization, going to become much more efficient and make less errors and be able to put out fires and solve problems when they arise, versus if you become a generalist. This is not an accident. Specialization is an active choice. And if you want to stack the deck in your favor so that when people look at you, you appear like Surgeon A rather than Surgeon B, that is a decision that you have to make, rather than succumbing to the desire to just be a jack of all trades, which I think a lot of online coaches make the mistake of doing, especially when they're starting out. If you'll allow me to take the medical analogy a little bit further, let's now imagine that in addition to having a broken leg, you're also unlucky enough to have a stubbed toe on the other leg and dry skin on both legs. What is likelier? Are you going to sit there with a broken leg and a stubbed toe and break out the lotion and start putting it on your skin to address the dry skin? Or are you going to sit there and think about, taping up your big toe when your shin bone is poking through your skin? Clearly not. You're going to address that broken leg first. Now, all three are problems, but the broken leg is the most painful, pressing, and urgent problem demanding your attention. And when you have limited resources, the lion's share of the resources that you have will go to the problems at the top of the hierarchy, at the top of the totem pole. So as a result, money goes to the people who solve the problems at the top of each individual's totem pole. The lower down the totem pole the problems you solve, the less and less money is left over for you, because the important ones have been solved first. Within the technology world, there's this term product market fit. And it's the idea that the value of a product or service or a business is unlocked the closer the fit between what the market demands, what people will pay for, and what the product provides, the problem it solves. If we're completely honest, in online coaching, you are the product. The product is your knowledge, your skill, your ability to improve people's performance via your experience. So as a result, you need to think about, if we go back to the totem pole analogy, what are the most pressing, painful, and urgent, the highest on the totem pole problems that you are equipped to solve based on your skill set and experience as a coach. You then need to think about finding the people who are most likely to suffer from those problems. And if there are subgroups within those people, who are the people most likely to spend money to solve those problems? Because as a result of that, you're going to be highest up the totem pole with the people with the most money to spend, who are going to be most glad of your ability to enhance their well-being and minimize cost to them. And it is much, much easier, just like in Silicon Valley, they look at what people want and they work backwards from that to make a product. It is much, much easier as an online coach to find those people, the most in pain, with the most money to spend, the most receptive, the best fit for you and your skills and your experience, and work backwards from that, and then make a decision to only do business with those people, because it's going to represent the greatest return on the investment of your time, money, and effort as a business person. Second reason why it's really important that you select an audience is communication. We're not going to talk about it within this course, but in order to have a successful online coaching business, you need repeat purchases. People have to keep purchasing your service again and again and again. I would argue that that is mostly about the product or customer experience. So in talking about that, we'd have to get into the details of, how the product is designed, how you run the business day to day. A lot of complex stuff we're not going to talk about in this course. Until money changes hands, though, it's all about belief. You haven't experienced the product yet. So like I said, you're making this mental calculation of, what do I perceive the enhancement in my well-being is going to be? And what do I perceive the cost to be? And what's the ratio between those two? Within the sales cycle or the purchasing decision itself, there are a series of beliefs that we have to check off in order for a prospective customer to arrive at a purchasing decision. Firstly, they have to believe that they have a problem. Remember that I said, if there is no dis-ease, if there is no discomfort, if there is no dissatisfaction, there is no motivation to act, to buy. So that is number one. Number two is that it's not just dry skin. It's not a stubbed toe. They have a broken leg. That is a high on the totem pole problem that is sufficiently urgent, painful, and pressing that you are seeking a solution to fix it. Then, because we're running this calculation of what's the most enhancement in well-being relative to cost, what I'm going to have to give up, available to me from all of the options that I have in front of me, because I want the best ratio possible. So I have to find the solution that is the best fit for me and my problems. Surgeon A, not surgeon B. Then we have to ask ourselves, is this fairly priced? And if the answer is yes, we have to ask ourselves, do we have a reason to act now rather than just put it off for another day? You might be lucky enough that there are people out there, just as a result of your existing relationship with them, their knowledge about you and what you do, all of those boxes are already checked. For everyone else that fits the profile of your prospective customer, and we already started to categorize them last week, there are going to be some people that need those boxes checking for them. You have to help cement those beliefs in the minds of your prospective customers. And this is a product of communication. And again, it's obvious. I don't need to point this out to you, but clearly the effectiveness of your communication is specific to the audience. Your specific style of communication, what the audience is receptive to, shared language, shared concepts, shared experiences, perhaps the affinity that your audience has for you, and so on. Which clearly, if we are judicious and strategic in how we select our audience, again, we can rig that game in our favor. How effectively you are able to cement beliefs and elicit the decision to buy within a specific audience is going to be a product of the things that you see on screen right now. Given all of the problems that a prospective customer has that is within your ability to help solve, are you speaking to the ones highest on the totem pole? I also believe, as a result of experience and my own experiences as a consumer, that I'm much more likely to buy from someone when I feel like they understand me and my problems intimately, and we come from a similar background and we have shared experiences. And I can see that the person that I'm buying from has not only suffered from the same problems that I'm suffering from now, they've importantly broken through the other side, and I can see a viable path to where they are from where I am right now. And your ability to tell a compelling and relatable story to your audience is going to help engender that. I also believe that when you do business with people, they're constantly looking for these subconscious cues about whether you are who you say you are, the perceived cost of doing business with you. And the more that you can confer insider status to subconsciously say to people, hey, we come from the same group, the more you're going to put them at ease, and the lower that perceived cost of doing business with you is likely to be. When you do get to talking about your product, hopefully you are positioning the value of your product in direct relation to the problems that either your audience has told you about or that you've been able to elicit by better understanding your audience. Likewise, with the ability to create urgency to act. Maybe you can leverage specific events in a calendar or your prospective audience's lives to get them to arrive at a purchasing decision. Again, all of these things you can rig in your favor by selecting only those people who are most receptive to all of the things that we talked about on screen as your audience, and then refining your communication with that audience over time to become as effective as possible and arrive at the outcome that you want, which is to do business. Now, unfortunately, it's not good enough that you know who it is you're going to do business with. You have to know where to find them, and they have to know that you exist. So again, resources are limited. There's only so much time, money, attention that you can deploy as an online coach in creating awareness and marketing yourself with a view to doing business with your target audience. So you need to, just like the consumer, try and get the greatest possible return on that time, money, and attention by only trying to seek out the highest value and most likely to buy prospective customers. So if we imagine that we're on safari and I offer you $100 for a picture of a leopard, where are you going to go? Are you going to go to the watering hole in the middle of the day? Probably not. You're likely to see some zebras, or you're going to see some hippos, but you're probably not going to see a leopard. You know that if you want to see a leopard, you're probably going to have to go looking up trees in the middle of the night. They like to hide, and they're nocturnal by nature. Using this same logic, you need to go to the place where your ideal customers hang out. And you need to bait the hook. You know, if you want them to come out, try and bait the hook. Try and convince them to come out by putting out some tasty morsels that they can't resist. And in doing so, you're going to attract the people that are most likely to do business with you and spend a lot of money when they do. In summary, everything that we've already talked about is going to be directly related to your ability to intelligently select and then more intimately understand the audience that you're going to do business with. If you can do that, they're going to pay you more money for the same product or service. It's going to be easier for you to communicate with them, both in how you market, in how you sell them, and you're going to spend a lot less time, money, effort, attention when you go out into the world and you try and find your ideal customers in the marketplace. Think of this as like trying to set fire with a magnifying glass. If you hold a magnifying glass over the same spot and focus for a long time, that's the only way that you're ever going to be able to catch fire. If you're always moving the magnifying glass around and not holding still, you're never going to generate the heat that results in a fire. And I've talked publicly about this before. It took me 4 years to get 750 likes on Facebook when I was a garden variety personal trainer operating in my own name. And out of anxiety, I would do business with literally anyone. As long as they had a pulse and money, I would do business with them. And it was, among a variety of other events, hearing this analogy of the magnifying glass that convinced me to finally focus on the niche of rugby, to buy rugbystrengthcoach.com, and to only put out information and products and services and only do business with rugby athletes. And again, it's not a perfect apples to apples comparison, but the Facebook page for Rugby Strength Coach accumulated 1,500 likes in a single day versus 750, which took me 4 years to get in my own name. And in a direct apples to apples comparison, I can promise you I made a lot more money under the Rugby Strength Coach banner working online than I did in person as a personal trainer who would train anyone. So I hope by now that I've made a compelling case to you as to why it's in your interests to pick a specific audience. And what we're going to do now is talk about the characteristics that we need to look for in selecting that audience. This will look familiar. This is what we already talked about last week. Now we're just going to try and flesh out those concepts and explain why it is we looked at these criteria last week. So if you remember, we're looking for who knows, likes, and trusts you. We're looking for people who want or need your help, people you can easily reach, and where you have the most professional credibility. So if we look at the diagonals, who wants or needs your help and where your credibility is, these are the main drivers of perceived value and perceived cost. The more someone wants or needs your help, that suggests that the higher up on the totem pole the particular problem they're coming to you with is. The more credible you are based on a variety of factors that we're going to talk about in later modules, the lower the perceived risk is going to be. So if we combine those two things, that gives us the greatest possible ratio between perceived value or enhancement in well-being and perceived cost, which juices the likelihood of a purchasing decision. The reason we're looking to do business with people who know, like, and trust us, in addition to credibility, is that we want to create a strong sense of affinity and to be able to tell compelling and relatable stories when we do business with people in order to put them at ease. Again, we'll go into more detail in later modules, but we're always looking to convey to our audience that we are essentially on the same path as our audience, as our customers. It's just that we're a few steps ahead of where they are, and we're offering them a path to where we are now by them doing business with us. The final bottom right-hand quadrant we've just talked about, when we talk about distribution, that's just effectively how we're able to get in front of people, to get eyeballs, to get people to see our message. The more people we can reach for the same conversion rate, the more money we make. The more we can easily reach people, leverage our networks, go to places where we know our prospective audience is going to be hanging out, the easier distribution becomes. And obviously, when we combine all of these factors together, we're likely to be increasing the amount of money that the business makes. However, it's not just enough that we pick an audience. I'm going to make the case that we need to pick a sub-audience or niche. Once you've selected your broad overall audience that you're going to serve, you actually want to go deeper. It's fractal. Just like one audience is going to be a smarter choice for you than another, the same is going to be true for segments within that audience. So if we want to use the sport of American football as an example, rather than just serve football athletes, we can split by position. We might be a coach for quarterbacks, a coach for corners, for receivers, for linemen, for kickers, and so on. And that's exactly what we see in the marketplace because it's good business and because the needs between these groups are going to be wildly different. So it makes sense that different coaches are going to be a better or worse fit for those groups and be perceived as more or less valuable within the marketplace as a consequence. Look within the audience that we just talked about on the previous slide. Are there particular segments of that audience or particular problem types that come to mind that strike you as particularly in pain or particularly motivating to act upon? In my opinion and experience, there is much more pain and stress associated with something like combine prep in football than, say, regular in-season training where the focus is on games. Likewise, there's going to be significantly more pain, actual physical pain, and motivation to spend on training to rehab a serious injury versus, say, developing hip mobility. In the first instance, getting back on the field is a must-have, whereas in the second, being more flexible is just a nice-to-have. So you want to remember to pick the biggest pain it is that is within your skill set to relieve. You also want to think about the prevalence of the problem that you're going after. You want to make sure that there's a lot of it going on so that you can do a lot of business. If we continue to use that example of football, we know that in any one year, there's going to be a handful of very serious neck injuries. However, choosing to specialize in only those really serious neck injuries, although it's an obviously painful problem, it's very serious, that would be a mistake, as there's just not enough business to go around in that instance. Thirdly, you want to think about competition. If you've ever read the book 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, you'll know that in a perfectly capitalistic marketplace, all of the profit gets competed away. Businesses race to the bottom in terms of price until there's no money left over to turn a profit. The chief example of this being the airline industry. Overall, there has been zero profit made ever in the airline industry. So for this reason, you want to pick a specific niche or problem where the audience is currently being underserved, or when you have a significant enough advantage that you're not going to be locked in a competition to the death with your peers. You want to try and zig when others are zagging. You don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to this. You just need to be a little bit different or a little bit more focused, and we'll talk more on this in later sections. Finally, you want to think about the purchasing power of the people that you are going after. I have a personal friend who's a dietitian to elite level MMA fighters. He's trained a number of athletes who have competed for world championships on pay-per-view UFC shows. And at the time that I'm making this, the most I think he's ever been paid by a single fighter, it's in the region of $50,000. And when you consider that he works with those athletes for 8 to 12 weeks at a time, he's available to them pretty much 24/7. And he literally flies out there and stays with them during fight week and prepares every single meal for them. It actually doesn't work out to be a fantastic hourly rate. Conversely, the same guy has worked with Silicon Valley executives who've paid him $5,000 a month for basic interpretation of their blood work, plus some training and nutrition plans and weekly check-ins. And he estimates that he spends a couple of hours per month on each client once he's onboarded them. And I would argue that that service that he provides to the MMA athletes is actually a lot more valuable in terms of the perception of who's consuming that service than what he's providing to the executives. Again, making weight and performing in peak condition in a championship fight on pay-per-view, that's an absolute essential must-have. Whereas for the execs, being a little bit leaner, a little bit healthier, it's a non-essential, it's nice to have. So why the disparity in pay or the return on per unit of effort and work on my friend's part? Well, the MMA athlete is giving up 3 to 5% of their contract value. The executive has probably made $5,000 by breakfast. So as a result, that 5K represents a much smaller proportion of their income relative to the 50K for the MMA athlete. So the deeper the pockets of your audience that you're doing business with, the more you can charge for the same service without it making as much of an impact to the perceived cost side of that ratio that we've been talking about, the perceived value relative to cost. Now, bear in mind, in this section, there are no right or wrong answers here. You need to use your judgment in deciding which sub-audience or niche best combines the 4 factors that we've just discussed and who it is that you're going to go after with your business offerings. But once you have done this, we now need to begin the process of precisely defining the characteristics of that audience. So once we've picked the audience and sub-audience or niche that we're going to try and serve, what we're going to do now is try and precisely define that audience through 3 different sets of criteria. The geographic, where they are, the demographic, who they are, and the psychographic, what kind of person they are and their behavior. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by dedicating a slide to geographics. I will just say that even when you're starting out online, you do want to try and focus on people as close to home as possible for a couple of reasons. One is if there is local news or events that you can piggyback off when trying to reach your target audience, that is going to be to your advantage because you'll know about it and your competitors will not. And the second reason is that you can leverage connections in your real world network to try and get introductions to people that might fit the criteria of your target audience that are mutual connections. Again, those people are going to come to you pre-sold versus, say, a stranger in another country that also speaks your language. Okay, let's now move on to demographics. Now, not all of this information is going to be pertinent or useful. Some of the factors, however, will be extremely useful to you in defining and identifying your target audience. It also might not be particularly useful starting out, as like we discussed last week, there's a lot of experimentation and testing of assumptions that happens when you're starting out as an online coach. The precise sub-audience or niche that you go after to begin with might not be the one that you end up with or that you find success with. But it should be self-evident that different groups of people are going to resonate with different topics or styles of communication and at different times in their life. And as you start to grow an audience, you can use these criteria to inform what it is you talk about and to who. So for example, at Strength Coach Network, our average customer was a 25 to 40-year-old white male located in Anglophile countries. Just as an aside, the vast majority of money that gets spent online in the Anglophone world is the UK and Ireland, Australia and New Zealand, Canada and America, and that's it. Once you get outside of that, it drops off a cliff. So my advice would be to focus on those regardless as you're consuming this course in English. These people tended to be educated to a postgraduate level, and on the lower end of that age range, so closer to 25, they tended to be unmarried with no children and did not own a home. So based on that information, should we spend time, for example, talking about topics that are pitched to a high school education level or a postdoctoral education level? Probably not. The sweet spot is somewhere in the middle. Should we be charging the earth for an annual membership when most of our audience are earning in that $40,000 to $65,000 a year range? Probably not. Should we be talking about strength and conditioning events in France? Or should we be piggybacking off an event or an injury that happened in Japanese baseball? Again, no, because this is not what our audience cares about or is aware of. This counts, or these factors, these demographic factors count even more if and when we get to the stage of spending money on paid advertising to acquire leads and customers. This is because every time we put an ad in front of somebody who is unlikely to buy from us, we are basically lighting money on fire. And these are the same demographic factors that we're going to be feeding to major platforms when we target our audience with ads. So the more we understand our audience and the more precise we are in targeting them with ads, the higher quality information we're giving to the platforms, the better results they're going to give back to us, and the higher return on investment we're going to get for our ad spend. Psychographics, basically what kind of a person are you and what behavior do you exhibit, is extremely useful because prior behavior is obviously the strongest predictor that we have of future behavior. And it's ultimately future behavior that we're trying to influence, namely a purchase. If you come from the audience that you're trying to do business with, developing a psychographic profile of your target audience should not be difficult at all. You just need to have been paying attention to the people that you're interacting with, what kind of people they are, and how they tend to behave. Regardless, though, whether this list is incomplete for you or you're actually going after an audience that you do not come from yourself, here are the variables that I try to look at and understand when I'm targeting an audience. The first thing is those hot button topics. If you know there is something that your audience cannot resist talking about, guess what your content needs to be centered around? Those limited number of topics. This is the bait that you put on the hook to get your ideal customers to come to you. Where is it online that they're talking about these things? This is, again, the analogy. Is it the watering hole or is it up the tree? You want to be meeting your ideal customers where they're already hanging out when you take that baited hook to them, because you're going to spend a lot less time, energy, and money finding customers if you do so. With regard to shared language and memes, I've read before the idea that memes are condensed information. And I agree with this because I believe that if you're able to use an audience specific meme in your communication with an audience or use shared terminology or language, it subconsciously conveys insider status to your audience, which obviously fosters trust and likability. It lowers those mental defenses, lowers that perceived cost of doing business with you, and it gives you a stronger foundation on which to try and sell to them down the line. When they talk to one another in public, which problems are the most common or painful? Because when they talk about their problems, particularly the most painful ones, they are implicitly telling you what they would pay for a solution to. And it's this solution or enhancement in well-being that you need to be trying to work backwards from when you develop the product that we're going to be talking about in next week's module. Remember, we're looking for product market fit. The market is going to tell you what it wants. It's your job to reverse engineer that with a product. Are there key players or events that you can talk about? That's another source of content that you can use when you're ready to market to. And obviously, you also want to be packaging this into forms of media that you know your audience likes to consume. An extreme example would be if you're targeting 65-year-old boomers, you're probably not going to be doing it with TikTok dances and challenges and memes. It's probably going to be longer form content like video or even the written word. Finally, where do they spend their money? Where they spend their money tells you about what they value. And it also tells you, thanks to the brands that they're doing business with, what kinds of messaging and marketing they're likely to respond to. These brands have already invested the time, money, and effort to find out what works for those people. If there is overlap between their business and their customers and yours, you can just be sneaky and copy what has already worked with them. I've left it off the screen because I personally don't like to leverage people's political and religious affiliations for business purposes. But rest assured, these are also valid psychographic variables that a lot of other people do consider and do go after when they are targeting their audience. I will leave that up to you, whether you wish to do so. Now that we've developed that 3-ring profile, geographic, demographic, psychographic, let's now talk about the strategy that we're going to try and employ to acquire leads and customers and maximize the return on the investment of our effort. Now, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the sales module, but the most fundamental prerequisite that we have to check off in order to convert prospective customers into actual ones and do business with them is to grab attention. If people don't know that we exist, do not pass go, do not collect $200. And this is because we keep using this phrase, limited resource. Attention is a limited resource. We are trying to be economical with how we spend it. So subconsciously, we're always looking for an excuse to stop paying attention to something. If something looks familiar or we've seen some variation of it countless times before, subconsciously, we just know immediately, stop paying attention. So as a result, we have to be different from what people are already seeing in order to stand out from the crowd and keep the kind of attention that leads to a sale. This is what Seth Godin would call a purple cow. He uses the analogy of if you're driving on holiday in France and you go through field after field after field of regular cows, you just tune them out until eventually you see a purple cow. That's clearly going to be the one that sticks out to you. We need to be the purple cow. After we have that initial attention, what we need to do is to steal a phrase from the book, Positioning, is to own the mental real estate. If you recall, we talked earlier about there's this mental process that our prospective customers have to go through in order to arrive at a purchasing decision. Do they have a problem? Does it merit solving now? Is the solution that we're offering the best fit for them? Is it priced fairly? And do they have a compelling reason to buy today? After we help them to realize, yes, they do have a problem, and it's not a stubbed toe, it's not dry skin, it's a broken bone, skin poking through the skin, you absolutely have to solve it now. That's when they're going to start to look at what are all the options available at my disposal vying for my business. You need to own that mental real estate to already have a strong positioning in the minds of your prospective customers so that when they come to that realization, you become the obvious and default choice. In the book Positioning, they talk about how it's much, much easier if you can to try and be the incumbent, to be the first to occupy that mental real estate because it's that much harder to come in and dislodge the incumbent. The phrase that they use in the book is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. You need to be so well positioned in the minds of your prospects that anyone who would try and come in to compete with you and dislodge you from their minds, it would be as dumb as fighting an 800-pound gorilla. So it's for this reason that, again, we want to specialize in the audience that we select, and we also want to be a little bit different and try and occupy new mental real estate that other people haven't gone to yet, and we'll talk about this in the next section. But the worst thing you can do is try and be all things to all men and appeal to everyone when you start out. This is a mistake that I made earlier in my career. I think it's a mistake that a lot of coaches make out of anxiety. They will try and do business with everyone. However, when you do this, you are trying to compete with multiple 800-pound gorillas at the same time, competing with people that already own that real estate in the minds of those niches, those people that had the discipline to specialize and to speak very, very effectively to specific pains and problems for those audiences and create a very, very strong connection. It's only when you've already been that 800-pound gorilla, that you own the real estate and you've established yourself, that you earn the right to then expand outward and do business with broader and broader groups of people. It just doesn't work the other way. Even if you look at like a Facebook, again, in 0 to 1, Peter Thiel talks about how it would have been a mistake for them strategically to go out and try and be a worldwide social network from the get-go. Instead, they were limited to just Harvard to begin with, then East Coast Ivy Leagues, then the Ivy League and a couple of schools on the West Coast, then American students in general, then America, and then country by country by country, they gradually took over the world. And even though you're not a Facebook, the same principles are going to apply to you as you develop and sell your products as an online coach to your audience. So somewhat parallel and related to this idea of being different and standing out from the crowd and grabbing attention, there's a great story that I think illustrates this concept well. If you've ever heard of Brian Johnson, he's the guy that's all over the internet right now talking about Blueprint, the idea that he can reverse biological aging and he's going to live forever. He's this tech close to being a billionaire, and he's using his money these days to run these medical experiments on himself. I saw an interview with him where he talked about his upbringing in the Mormon church and how he was sent on mission to Mexico with a view, obviously, to converting the local populace to Mormonism. Now, Mexico is a heavily Catholic country, and he talked about the first people that he approached, the reactions when he tried to convert them were actually ones of great anger and sometimes violence. And he soon realized this strategy is not going to work. So he started to go after those people that were disaffected or rejected or left behind by the Catholic Church, because these people would be the most receptive to the message that he was trying to convey and the most likely to convert to Mormonism. He knew that for those people that had already found a place and a home within the Catholic Church and didn't have any ill will or ill feeling towards the church, it would be a fool's errand to try and convert them away. I think this same principle applies when it comes to targeting an audience as an online coach. If we imagine each audience as like ripples in a pond, a series of concentric circles, at the very center of the circle is the evangelist. It's those customers that no matter what a company does, they're going to buy the product, they're going to keep coming back, the company can do no wrong, and they're actively going to try and recruit other people to become customers of the business. They're out there evangelizing about how good this company is. You are never going to convert those people, nor are you going to convert loyal customers. Maybe not the people that evangelize, but they're certainly satisfied in every regard with the product, the customer experience, and how the company positions itself in public and communicates with its audience. Regular customers might be those people that certainly consume the product, but it's not an ideal or perfect fit like with the evangelists or the loyal customers. Maybe there's some aspect of how the company positions itself or communicates that they're not a massive fan of. Fringe would be those people that are current customers and soon not about to be because of the factors that I just talked about, or it might be people that have not yet bought, they're kind of on the fence, they're thinking about it. Haters would just be those people that, for whatever reason, they will never do business with this company. These are the disaffected people that we need to be going after with our message to try and convert them. the people at the center, we are wasting our effort if we go after these individuals. So, a big mistake that a lot of people make when they start out is trying to me too and copy the incumbents that already operate in the space or audience that you're going after. This, to me, is a mistake because these people have already found, or these companies have already found an audience that they are a good fit for. They have already found a style of communication that already connects with that audience. They are already satisfied customers. Nobody is going to do a better job of doing that than them. Certainly not you doing a bad impression of them starting out. It's absolutely pointless to try and go after these inner rings of their audience. Instead, what you need to do is be different, stand out from the crowd, position yourself and communicate differently to the incumbents so that you might give the people on the fringes and the haters, give them a home, make that the center of your audience, and then gradually expand outwards as you've solidified that position. To give a personal example from my own business career, that is one of the reasons why we used to go after Soranex so hard at Strength Coach Network. We knew that, respectfully, if you are a football strength coach, you're a religious conservative from America, you clearly don't care about conditioning to the extent that you're happy to be big and fat as long as you can lift more weight, you call everybody coach, you wrap yourself in the flag, you love playing pretend soldiers, there's certain things that you love to consume on media. That is why we just flipped it on its head and went after everybody else in the industry. I'm clearly not American, I'm English, I drink gin and tonics when I drink. I'm not a big, strong guy, but I do like conditioning, I do like working on the field. So we used to mock all that stuff and we would basically plant our flag in the ground and say, hey, that's what they're about, we're about this. If you are into this stuff also, this is your home, come do business with us. And I think we did an okay job at doing that. So related to this concept is the idea of an anti-avatar. When we talk about avatar, we're obviously talking about the geographic, demographic, psychographic characteristics that precisely define our ideal customer. One thing that I would like you to consider is describing the avatar of the incumbents, the people that are already operating in the space or audience that you want to go after, that have already found a good product market fit and a good audience to do business with. Describe them through the geographic, demographic, and psychographic factors and flip it on its head. In doing so, you might be able to identify specific groups that might be on the fringes or actively dislike those incumbents. And wherever possible, include these people in your audience, provide value to them, provide solutions to their problems, and speak to them in a compelling manner. It's those people that should probably at least form a part of the audience that you're going to go after, because by default, if you position yourself against the incumbents, that is going to allow you to speak different and be different to those individuals, give them a home, and have them form the center of your audience as you start to build out your position in the marketplace. So hopefully by the end of this module, you can see the value of picking an audience, precisely defining it, and being strategic in how you go after it, because in doing so, we can then work backwards from the problems and the pains of that audience to reverse engineer products and services that give us product market fit, that create value that we can then sell to that audience. We can also convert them from prospective to actual customers in a convincing manner by speaking to their most urgent, pressing, and painful problems, and obviously maximally conveying the value of any solutions that we can offer. We can also speak to that audience on subjects that are relevant, interesting, and entertaining to them in an engaging fashion where they already hang out on the internet. And as you might have guessed, that is going to be the modules that we're going to cover in the next 4 weeks. I will see you in the next video, which is going to be the practical section.